Welcome to Concept. This is Dr. Bill Loveless, welcoming you to our program, and thank you for listening. Today we're asking the question, do parents matter? What do you think? My answer today is yes and no. It's yes and no. Parents do matter very much. Parents do matter. Well, what if you don't have a parent? Or what if you don't have a functional parent? Is it all over for you? No, not at all. So parents do matter, and we're going to talk about that. Since the beginning of time, as far as we know, way back, it was important to have children, particularly male children, because male children were the ones that kept the family name up, inherited the property, and kept the dynasty going. Your name was perpetuated as you had children, particularly male children. So that was very desirable, and that was the way it was until now. Things have changed a lot in modern times, and that's what we want to talk about today, the changes that have happened. How has that affected parenting? How has that affected children? And how does that affect you as you watch this program and as we look at the whole question of do parents matter? So let's take a look at what we mean by children and parents and parenting and childing. God's extravagant gift to us is what we call a child. When Eve had Cain, she said, "With the help of the Lord, I have gotten a man-child." This was a real blessing in those days, and in every day. The function of a child is an extravagant gift to us. I'm all in favor of children because I have children. But you know what? In today's world, children are not necessary to a successful marriage. There are a lot of people that don't have children that have a successful family, a successful marriage. Some couples sit down together and decide when they get married that they don't want to have children. Some change their mind later. Some stay with that. And so in today's world, children are not necessary to a successful marriage. They can help a successful marriage, and in some cases they can be a real hindrance to a successful marriage. How do we balance those two off is the question that we're raising. Human responsibility for subduing the earth, or exercising dominion over it. The Bible says exercise dominion over it, with our ability to be fruitful and multiply. In other words, we have two issues here. We have two problem issues. How can on one hand we be successful, multiply, inherit the earth, exercise dominion over the earth, the ability to be fruitful and multiply, while at the same time looking at poverty, disease, and war are a danger to the children. In other words, we have these conflicting ideas. On the one hand, we are told to be fruitful and multiply. On the other hand, as we look around, it's a pretty dangerous place. And as we've discovered, all of us, during our lifetime, the world is a very dangerous place for children. It still is. It is today as I speak. It is today as you live. You know that, and I know that. So we're trying to balance the scriptural idea of multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it with the idea of safety for the children and security. Because they deserve food, they deserve space, and they deserve peace. Poverty, disease, and war are a danger, and children deserve food, space, and peace. Those are very, very crucial matters when we talk about parenting children in today's world. The Chinese, of course, said a long time ago, it's one child for each family. And China saw the problems inherent in that conflict between multiplying and replenishing the earth and the poverty and the war, the disease, poor income for many, many families around the world and in China. So they made a law, one child per family, as their way of dealing with the problems that we're looking at. It's never convenient to have children. Never really convenient. They change our lives drastically. All of you know that if you've had children. They change our lives drastically. Before I had children, after I got married, I had a freshly earned master's degree. Big deal, I thought. And I was an expert on child training. I was all of 26 years old, a freshly minted master's degree from the seminary, and I was an expert on child training. Until I had children. Wow. Did that change me in a hurry? I stopped giving my lectures on child training when I had children. And I haven't taken it up since. And that's been a long time. My children now are in their 50s. And I still am very careful and reticent about talking about parenting. You know why? Because we learn humility. That's the next point I want to make, and all of you who have children understand what I mean when I say we learn humility. They introduce us to our finitude. What does finitude mean? Finitude means finite, human, mistake-making, all kinds of problems being with life and being alive. That's what children introduce us to our finitude. They also introduce to the limits of our wisdom. I got introduced to that real fast when I had children. The limits of my wisdom. Not only to my finitude, but the limits of my wisdom. I wasn't nearly as smart as I thought I was, and I didn't know that till I had children, and they tested everything. But that's not all negative. There's a positive side. They introduce us to the vastness of our love and our patience and our understanding. I wouldn't give anything for my children. I have been introduced to some individuals. I talked with one of my daughters on the phone this morning before this program. And I thought to myself, what a blessing. She has taught me to love like I never would have known before. She has taught me patience. Trust me. Real patience and understanding like I would never have known before. So these are the blessings that come with children. Do parents matter? That's the question. Answer is yes and no. Early relationships have crucial impact on our children. John Bowlby's attachment concepts clarify the importance of early training. What do we mean by attachment concepts of John Bowlby? Famous English researcher. I love to read him. He's dense reading. He's got a big, thick book about 3 inches thick on attachment theory, and everybody's kind of latched onto that. And why have they latched onto it? Because it's so absolutely crucial and important. Bowlby says during the first 2 years, children need copious amounts of warm, loving care from adults. Who are these adults? Well, there are many kinds of adults. Daycare center attendants, daycare homes attendants, and single mothers who have to work. These are some of the problem areas. John Bowlby simply said, every child is much better off, and I agree with him totally, to have an attachment relationship, a survival relationship with a survival figure in the first 2 years of their lives. They can go through all kinds of other stuff, as we'll see later on in the program today. But they have to have a real attachment to a survival figure, to a mother, a grandmother, a father, an adult, during those first 2 years, who loves them and cares for them. Now, if you're going to make a choice, if you have to make a choice, it's probably better to go with a daycare home than a daycare center, simply because there are more opportunities in a daycare home for that close attachment relationship to develop between the child and the caregiver. Bowlby makes a great point of this, and we're going to come back to those points over and over again several times during this program, because that's a very crucial situation. Do parents matter? Yes and no. Now, right now, I want to talk with you about one of the most interesting experiments that has gone on and studies in our world, the Kauai study. And I want to take a look at the whole concept of resilient children. We mean resilient children are children from less than ideal circumstances, and these children challenge the conventional wisdom. I want to talk to you now about some very interesting outcomes under the question, do parents matter? And the answer is yes and no. And we've looked at the yes side, John Bowlby's ideas of attachment. Yes says yes. These first 2 years are absolutely crucial. I had one of my clients in my office this week, and she's divorcing from her husband. Husband is divorcing her. They have one child. And she's worried about the future of the child and the divorce, and she should be. Divorce is hard on children. We're going to talk about that during this series of programs. But I reassured her, during the first 2 years of your child's life, he had grandma, he had a number of adult caregivers and father who were very close to him. And that's very important for the future. That will help make him what we call a resilient child. But what happens to those people from much less than ideal circumstances? The conventional wisdom has a few understandings which I want to challenge today in this program. Number one, the nuclear family, father, mother, and kids. That's what we mean by nuclear family. The nuclear family's influence is paramount. Now, that's an absolutely true statement, and I believe in it. There's no way you can take away from the nuclear family's influence as a paramount influence on the life and the future and the well-being of the child as it becomes an adult and grows into adulthood and has a family of its own. In other words, but what about the millions of children who don't come from nuclear families where there's a father, mother, where there is attachment, where there is closeness? Are they doomed? What about them? That's the other side of the question, do parents matter? Yes and no. This is the no side. Early trauma can't be undone. That's a conventional wisdom idea. Most of you who are watching me buy into that. And I do too, to a degree. And it's to that degree that we want to talk today. Early trauma can be undone. There's an awful lot of work today in counseling and psychiatry and psychology on trauma. We've had a lot of work done with war heroes coming back with heavy trauma, post-traumatic stress syndrome, and other kinds of trauma. Early trauma, even the early trauma, the first 2 years of life, can be undone with the proper understanding and treatment. So that conventional wisdom that early trauma can't be undone, I challenge on this program. It's not easy, but it can be undone. The next one is adversity always damages rather than challenges. Well, again, I have to agree with the one way to make this statement. Adversity often damages rather than challenges. But I take that word always out and we say adversity always challenges, no, and damages. Adversity sometimes damages rather than challenges. Adversity sometimes challenges us to rise beyond it and above it, and we end up doing better. So that's, another way to look at adversity and look at resilient children. Another concept in the conventional wisdom idea, children from sufficiently troubled families are pretty well doomed. A lot of people feel that way. Children from sufficiently troubled families are doomed. No, they're not necessarily doomed. Children from sufficiently troubled families can somehow climb out of that doom and gloom scenario, and we're going to talk about how that happens on this program. By the way, get ready, because we're going to tell you about our parents' quiz. We're offering to all of you today a quiz for parents. So later in the program, we'll give you that address. You can do it right here online and get it from us. Remember, don't misuse it. Don't use it on somebody else. Don't use it on your grandkids. Don't use it on your kids and their grandkids. Use it on yourself. It gives you a way to kind of gauge where you are as a parent. The familiar risk model says we expect children will fail if their parents are inattentive or absent, or if their parents are the victims of poverty, violence, alcoholism, drug abuse, mental illness, and unemployment. Leave that on the screen a minute. Let's talk about all of those. The familiar risk factor model, this is what everybody kind of thinks. We expect children who come from families where the parents are inattentive or even absent, or the parents are victims of poverty, no money, welfare, violence, beating up on the kids all the time, alcoholism, drunk all the time, drug abuse, mental illness, and unemployment. I mean, that's quite a that's quite a lineup. And the familiar risk factor says if kids come from this, throw them away. Get rid of them. They can't be helped. I challenge that. They can be. The second risk factor, researchers indicate that we shouldn't ignore those who beat the odds. That's the point. You have all of these factors. You have these poverty, no money, alcoholism, drug abuse, violence. But what happens to the survivors? How do the survivors survive? Research indicates that we shouldn't ignore those who somehow survive these conditions, who survive these odds. What is the explanation for one sexually abused girl's becoming an unwed mother, or a prostitute, while other unwed mothers become Oprah Winfrey's or Maya Angelou's? How do you account for that? In one case, the unwed mother becomes a prostitute or an unwed mother and goes one way, and another girl comes along, an unwed mother or a prostitute, and turns out differently. What does one man reared in a harsh, overcrowded household in Richmond, California? Richmond, California is a tough town in the San Francisco area. How does one man reared in a harsh, overcrowded household in Richmond, California become a crack or crack cocaine addict who dies of AIDS, while his brother, same home, folks, same home exactly, Christopher Darden, his brother, graduates from law school and becomes a successful lawyer and participates in the prosecution of O.J. Simpson? How do you explain that coming from the same home? Do parents matter? I keep asking this question. The answer is yes and no. Consider the at-risk children of Kauai. Where is Kauai? It's in Hawaii. That's one of the islands in Hawaii. And we're going to look at a very interesting study. In a 40-year study of 210 at-risk children born to sugar plantation workers suffering perinatal health problems, familial alcoholism, low levels of education, violence, discord, and mental illness. These are researchers who followed the children for 40 years. What did these children come from? I just gave you the list. All kinds of dire circumstances, all kinds of dire circumstances. No money, alcoholism, poverty. The parents worked in the sugarcane fields of Kauai. People in the level of life with not much hope. So researchers studied the children in Kauai over a longitudinal period. That's a long period, 40 years, to see what happened. By then, 138 of the 210 children had performed as expected. They checked in actually every 5 years. And after 40 years, 138 of the 210 performed as expected. Premature pregnancies by the age of 18, in need of health services, conflict at school and with the law. And what about the other 73, or the 1/3? Hey folks, listen to me carefully. 2/3 of them performed as expected, but 1/3, fully 1/3, became very successful people. Warner and Smith's 1992 study, 1/3 of the children of Kauai developed into competent, confident, caring young adults. They loved well, they worked well, and they expected well. That's a very interesting finding. That's a very interesting finding indeed. What is the explanation? Well, let's take a look. In a recent follow-up, all but 2 were still living successful lives recently. What made the difference? Here we go. Temperament. The baby was likable, outgoing, active, and cuddly at the very beginning. It possessed average intelligence, like everybody else in town. It had no prolonged separation from its primary caregiver. There you go with John Bowlby again. In the very early years of these lives, these children had mothers and fathers, caregivers, that really took care of them as caregivers should. They had an extended family, enhanced the child's grandmothers and grandfathers. They had friends that were extended family that took good care of them. And that's how 1/3 of these children in the study survived the odds and went on to be successful children. The child was adept at recruiting adult caregivers, teachers, adult friends. The family was involved actively in the church. Spirituality came in. These kids came from families involved in the church. In the Hawaiian Islands, the Mormon church was very prominent, but other churches on the islands also became very prominent. So, do parents matter? Nature and nurture constantly interact. Yes, they do matter. Nature and nurture. Nature, something we don't have a whole lot to do with, and nurture, we have a lot to do with as parents. Nature and nature do to interact. We are constantly presented with new choices and challenges. And most adults who enhanced children's lives were relatives, listen to me carefully, teachers, low-paid worker groups, social workers, teachers, adults that the children simply latched onto. Somehow surviving children, these children that can survive, have the ability to latch on to adult figures who become their survival figures. Every child needs an adult mentor. Every child needs you. Change the destiny of a child. Any responsible adult, and I'm looking at some right now as I look down the barrel of this camera right into your room and into your house. You are that adult, I am that adult. Every responsible adult can be a surrogate parent or can rescue a child. Volunteers in area churches, Sunday schools and Sabbath schools, children's agencies, and elementary schools can become important to a child. Have you thought of volunteering as an adult helper in a school or a church near you to help a child that needs an adult survival figure? This is the way to survive. This is the way. Do parents matter? Yes and no. It is important for us in this world to become the kind of person that can change the destiny of a child. There's probably one out there now that's looking for you. I have a quiz I'd like to send you, so remember, check in on this station and let me give it to you. And I have it right here. Here's our address, www.sls-tv.com. www.sls-tv.com. It's on the screen, and we'll be happy to send you the parents' quiz to help you find out what kind of a parent you are and what kind of a parent you can become, what kind of an adult you can become as you involve yourself and change the destiny of a child in a nearby school, a child in a nearby church, or a child in your community. Remember, the children that survived are the children who found adult mentors. Every child needs an adult mentor, an adult who cares about them. And remember, it's not important to be perfect. You can't be a perfect adult. But it is important today to try to do better. That's the best you can do.